the antidote to political and religious tyranny, or the reality of your world. I make these videos to change the way you think, because almost everything you have been taught was designed to stop you thinking critically and accept everything you are told as truth without question. Not my king, the great deception. In this video, I'm going to present the evidence that proves Charles is not king of the United Kingdom and show you that this is confirmed in public records. He does hold the title of king in other Commonwealth countries, but not in the United Kingdom. He does not represent the crown, but the clowns. This is not my circus. These are not my clowns. The UK government and all those pertaining to have authority within the United Kingdom are guilty of high treason against you. Nobody, it would seem, has held any public office since 1972. Even those that you might believe to hold authority or be an enforcement officer of the law are technically impersonating police officers, a criminal offence under Section 90 of the Police Act 1996. Anyone working for a court is impersonating a court official, an offence under legislation such as the Crime and Courts Act 2013. Once again, thanks to Terry, the Robin Hood of the realmofengland.com, and Callie Spell of Dark Matters, we have been shown how deep this deception goes and how long they have been at it. Please remember to like and share if you find value in this video. You should especially share this video to anyone you know that is in the employment of the de facto government, council, police, or a court, because they are probably unaware they are breaking the law. So what is high treason, and why do I say the UK government is knowingly guilty of it? Treason is the crime of betraying one's country, especially by attempting to kill or overthrow the sovereign or government, or the action of betraying someone or something. High treason, we are told, is treason against the sovereign, or denoting the severity of the act of treason. In my last video, Legal versus Lawful, I stated that we are sovereign, so any attempt to kill someone could be classed as high treason, just as an example. I also showed how the coronation orb is a symbol of our sovereignty. The monarch, as they pledge their coronation oath to serve the sovereign people, holds this physical representation of our powers of sovereignty. This loan of our sovereignty is held in trust by the monarch for our benefit. They literally hold our power, which cannot be given away to anyone else, not even to the government. The government, otherwise known as His or Her Majesty's government, derives its power from the monarchy, who in turn is empowered by us, the sovereign people of the United Kingdom. Therefore, we are technically above the law, and no law can be made without our authority, especially if it contradicts our common law, our constitutional law, or our human rights. This means that we could pick and choose under which laws and which jurisdictions we choose to stand. This concept might seem chaotic, and you might even call it anarchy, to which I would be inclined to agree. It would be anarchy, but that does not make it chaotic. In fact, I would even go as far to say that we have been living in anarchy for over 50 years. At this point, I would also like to thank Colin Gibbons for providing an alternative viewpoint to my thoughts and the actions I am about to relay to you. Colin's input has hopefully enabled me to present a more balanced view, as it is easy to find yourself wandering down a path that potentially finds you further from the reality of the truth you are exposing, especially when left to your own self-reasoning. Some of the following evidence might initially seem irrelevant, but I will try to present it as chronologically as possible, then draw it all together at the end of this presentation. So let's start with a little history. In 1936, King George V died, and succession of the crown was passed to his son, becoming Edward VIII. But his abdication later the same year passed the crown to his brother, George VI. Although Princess Elizabeth was third in line to the throne at her birth, the public probably thought that her uncle Edward would have an heir to the throne before passing on the succession of the throne, although his father, George V, had predicted that Edward would not last more than a year and saw Albert, later known as George VI, the more suitable successor. Princess Elizabeth was 10 when her father became king, George VI, confirming her future succession to the throne. By 1952, Queen Elizabeth II was, I'm sure, extremely well educated on her duties and responsibilities to the country and the sovereign people of the kingdom. In 1957, the Treaty of Rome was signed by the founding members of the EEC. This treaty set out the framework of the Economic European Community, including the creation of a Supreme Court of Justice overseeing the entire community and superseding the individual states' sovereign powers of law. At some point prior to December 1960, Prime Minister Harold Macmillan and Edward Heath MP discussed the benefits and implications of joining the EEC. Edward Heath then sought advice from Lord Kilmuir. Lord Kilmuir, David Maxwell Fyfe, was the Lord Chancellor of Great Britain. As Lord Chancellor, he was the highest-ranking government minister, the cabinet minister responsible for the judiciary and the operation of the legal system, and he presided over the House of Lords. From July 1960 to October 1963, Edward Heath became the Lord Privy Seal and Deputy Foreign Secretary, with special responsibilities for the negotiation for the UK to join the European Economic Community. In December 1960, Lord Kilmuir wrote an open letter to Edward Heath. The published extracts of Lord Kilmuir's letter on the parliamentary website seem to have deliberately removed key elements of the original public letter, which was in essence kept private for around 40 years. No doubt the Queen was privy to the written response in 1960 and well versed in the constitutional implications. Lord Kilmuir had included comments on the potential implications of Britain joining the European Economic Community, to which he noted in the letter to Edward Heath the inevitable loss of some degree of parliamentary sovereignty. Fortunately, we have a copy of the full text of this letter, along with comments of David Clues, the lead correspondent for Unity News Network. This was published in April 2019. The link is in the description below, and I will now read out the letter and David Clues' comments. But before I do that, I need to clarify the definition of praemunire. In simple terms, it means to stop foreign states from interfering with domestic issues. This was primarily enacted to prevent the Pope from summoning people to Rome to stand trial and imposing harsh sentences. More will be revealed within the letter.
In answer to a request by Edward Heath MP on the 30th of November 1960, the Lord Chancellor Lord Kilmuir replied, making it clear that there were serious problems with the limitations imposed by English constitutional and common law on Britain's joining the then EEC. Lord Kilmuir mentions ways in which the constitution will conflict with Heath's plans, but he also indicates ways of subverting that conflict. The additional comments inserted below in bold show very clearly that the Heath government was fully prepared to commit acts of sedition and treason in order to take the UK into the EEC. Unfortunately, we do not have a copy of Heath's original letter to Lord Kilmuir.
My dear Ted, you wrote to me on the 30th of November about the constitutional implications of our becoming a party to the Treaty of Rome. I have now had an opportunity of considering what you say in your letter and have studied the memoranda you sent me. I agree with you that there are important constitutional issues involved. I have no doubt that if we do sign the treaty, we shall suffer some loss of sovereignty, but before attempting to define or evaluate the loss, I wish to make one general observation. At the end of the day, the issue whether or not to join the European Economic Community must be decided on broad political grounds, and if it appears from what follows in this letter that I find the constitutional objections serious, that does not mean that I consider them conclusive. I do, however, think it important that we should appreciate clearly from the outset exactly what, from the constitutional point of view, is involved if we sign the treaty, and it is with that consideration in mind that I have addressed myself to the questions you have raised.
He is clear that if we do sign the agreement with the EEC, we will suffer some loss of sovereignty. This is a very clear act of treason because our constitution expressly forbids any such surrender of any part of our constitution to a foreign power beyond the control of the Queen in Parliament. This is evidenced by the Convention, which states, Parliament may do many things, but what it may not do is surrender any of its rights to govern unless we have been defeated in war. The ruling given to King Edward III in 1366, in which he was told that King John's action in surrendering England to the Pope and ruling England as a vassal king to Rome was illegal because England did not belong to John. He held it only in trust for those who follow him, and by the law of kingship, he must pass it on to his successors in the state in which he received it. In any case, the money that the Pope was demanding as tribute was not to be paid because England's kings were not vassal kings to the Pope, nor was the money legitimately owed.
Adherence to the Treaty of Rome would, in my opinion, affect our sovereignty in three ways. A Parliament would be required to surrender some of its functions to the organs of the community. B. The Crown would be called on to transfer part of its treaty-making power to those organs of the community. The English Constitution confers treaty-making powers only on the sovereign. The sovereign cannot transfer those powers to a foreign power, nor even to our own Parliament, because they are mere servants of the monarch. Sovereignty itself cannot be given away, as it resides with the people who entrust it to the monarch for her lifetime, and the monarch is obliged by law to pass that sovereignty on to any successor as it was received. C. Our courts of law would sacrifice some degree of independence by becoming subordinate in certain respects to the European Court of Justice.
It is a praemunire to allow any case to be taken to a foreign court not under the control of the sovereign. The European Court of Justice or the European Court of Human Rights are foreign courts not under the control of our sovereign. Praemunire is a crime akin to treason.
The position of Parliament. It is clear that the memorandum prepared by your legal advisers that the Council could eventually, after the system of qualified majority voting had come into force, make regulations which would be binding on us even against our wishes, and which would in fact become for us part of the law of the land. There are two ways in which this requirement of the treaty could in practice be implemented.
It is a praemunire to allow any laws or regulations not made by the sovereign in Parliament to take effect as law in England. This is illegal under the 1351 Treason Act. Also the 1351 Act of Praemunire, which was brought in by King Edward III because he believed it an affront to his honour and dignity as King of England to have laws imposed upon his kingdom by a foreign power. It was illegal that any of his subjects be taken out of England to be tried in a foreign court, or for his bishops to excommunicate any of his subjects on the orders of the Pope. It is a further praemunire to allow foreign laws to affect England, as this is entirely contrary to the Act of Praemunire 1392, the Act of Supremacy 1559, the Declaration and Bill of Rights 1688, 1689 and the Treason Felony Act 1848.
Parliament could legislate ad hoc on each occasion that the Council make regulations requiring action by us. The difficulty would be that, since Parliament can bind neither itself nor its successors, we could only comply with our obligations under the treaty if Parliament abandoned its right of passing independent judgment on the legislative proposals put before it. A parallel to the position of Britain and the EU would be, for instance, the Constitutional Convention, whereby Parliament passed British North American bills without question at the request of the Parliament of Canada. In this respect, Parliament here would have in substance, if not in form, abdicated its sovereign position, and it would have pro tanto to do the same for the community.
No such power exists for Parliament to do this. This would be an act of treason under the 1351 Treason Act, a praemunire under the 1351 and 1392 Act of Praemunire, an act of treason under the 1559 Act of Supremacy, the 1688, 1689 Declaration and Bill of Rights and the Treason Felony Act 1848.
It would, in theory, be possible for Parliament to enact at the outset legislation which would give automatic force of law to any existing or future regulations made by the appropriate organs of the community. For Parliament to do this would go far beyond the most extensive delegation of powers even in wartime that we have ever experienced, and I do not think there is any likelihood of this being acceptable to the House of Commons. Whichever course were adopted, Parliament would retain in theory the liberty to repeal the relevant act or acts, but I would agree with you that we must act on the assumption that entry into the community would be irrevocable. We should therefore have to accept a position where Parliament had no more power to repeal its own enactments than it has in practice to abrogate the Statute of Westminster. In short, Parliament would have to transfer to the Council, or other appropriate organ of the community, its substantive powers of legislating over the whole of a very important field.
There is no constitutionally acceptable method of doing this because it would be tantamount to a total abrogation of their duty to govern us according to our laws and customs. And it would be an act of treason under the 1351 Treason Act, a praemunire under the 1351 and 1392 Act of Praemunire, and treason under the 1559 Act of Supremacy, the 1688, 1689 Declaration and Bill of Rights and the Treason Felony Act 1848.
Regarding treaty-making powers. The proposition that every treaty entered into by the United Kingdom does to some extent fetter our freedom of action is plainly true. Some treaties such as GATT and OEEC restrict severely our liberty to make agreements with third parties, and I should not regard it as detrimental to our sovereignty that, by signing the Treaty of Rome, we undertook not to make tariff or trade agreements without the Council's approval. But to transfer to the Council or the Commission the power to make such treaties on our behalf, and even against our will, is an entirely different proposition. There seems to me to be a clear distinction between the exercise of the sovereignty involved in the conscious acceptance by us of obligations under treaty-making powers and the total or partial surrender of sovereignty involved in our cession of these powers to some other body. To confer a sovereign state's treaty-making powers on an international organization is the first step on the road which leads by way of confederation to the fully federal state. I do not suggest that what is involved would necessarily carry us very far in this direction, but it would be a most significant step and one for which there is no precedent in our case. Moreover, a further surrender of sovereignty of parliamentary supremacy would necessarily be involved. As you know, treaty-making power is vested in the Crown. Parliamentary sanction is required for any treaty which involves a change in the law or the imposition of taxation, to take two examples, and we cannot ratify such a treaty unless Parliament consents. But if binding treaties are to be entered into on our behalf, Parliament must surrender this function and either resign itself to becoming a rubber stamp or give the community, in effect, the power to amend our domestic laws.
This is a complete surrender of our sovereignty, a clear act of treason under the 1351 Treason Act and a praemunire under the 1351 and 1392 Act of Praemunire. It is treason under the 1559 Act of Supremacy, the 1688, 1689 Declaration and Bill of Rights and the Treason Felony Act 1848.
Independence of the courts. There is no precedent for our final appellate tribunal being required to refer questions of law, even in a limited field, to another court, and as I assume to be the implication of refer, to accept the court's decision. You will remember that when a similar proposal was considered in connection with the Council of Europe, we felt strong objection to it. I have no doubt that the whole of the legal profession in this country would share my dislike for such a proposal, which must inevitably detract from the independence and authority of our courts. Of those three objections, the first two are by far the more important. I must emphasize that in my view the surrenders of sovereignty involved are serious ones, and I think that as a matter of practical politics, it will not be easy to persuade Parliament or the public to accept them. I am sure that it would be a great mistake to underestimate the force of objections to them. But these objections ought to be brought out into the open now, because, if we attempt to gloss over them at this stage, those who are opposed to the whole idea of our joining the community will certainly seize on them with more damaging effect later on. Having said this, I would emphasize once again that, although those constitutional considerations must be given their full weight when we come to balance the arguments on either side, I do not for one moment wish to convey the impression that they must necessarily tip the scale. In the long run we shall have to decide whether economic factors require us to make some sacrifices of sovereignty. My concern is to ensure that we should see exactly what it is that we are being called on to sacrifice, and how serious our loss would be. Yours ever, David.
It is a praemunire to subject Her Majesty's courts of law to the domination of a foreign court outside Her Majesty's control.
So what David Clues is pointing out here is the actual law, the constitutional law, that is actually being implied by Lord Kilmuir, and we can say that the signing of the treaty was tantamount to treason by Macmillan and Heath. If we consider the full implications and the modus operandi of those who feel entitled to hold the control over this realm and the sovereign beings resident within, then we might reasonably assume they asserted some force, blackmail and bribery, to subvert the constitutional rules of law. The allegations pertaining to the Canadian Kamloops missing children might have been the leverage used against the Crown. Other sexual indiscretions may have been used against state officials. The UK unconstitutionally applied to join the Union in 1963 under Prime Minister Harold Macmillan and Edward Heath as Lord Privy Seal. In 1971, the government moved our currency, in line with the United States of America, from the gold standard to fiat-based on the 15th of February, selling the decimalised pound as easier to trade with in other countries who already used decimal systems. A fiat currency means that the government controls the value of the currency by decree and is able to devalue the currency by issuing more currency into circulation. Issuing money is a stealth tax by devaluing your money you have saved. This, in turn, promotes consumerism by making your currency more valuable the sooner you spend it. It also encourages the growth of debt, as you own less in the future. So, if you purchased gold a year ago using a credit card, then sold the gold today, even with a 30% interest rate on your credit card, you would have made a profit, i.e., you would have generated money as gold has risen 50% in value in the past year. Or was it your currency being devalued by 33% in the past year by the government's increase of supply? You probably think that inflation is the cost of goods increasing, unless you've read my book or watched my previous content on currencies. Inflation is usually cited as being caused by shortages in the supply chain or by higher demand reducing the supply, whereas in reality, inflation's biggest cause is the devaluation of the currency by increasing its supply, effectively printing more money. Interestingly, most government fiscal policies tend to tackle inflation by circulating more currency. This interesting circular logic is not commonly known or the flaws understood. But back to the EEC. On 22nd of January 1972, the Treaty of Accession was signed in Brussels by Prime Minister Edward Heath. If we also consider the obsession of astronomy with the leaders of the world, we must assume that the conjunction of Mars and the Moon prior to Uranus going retrograde played a part in the actions to commit high treason against us. The UK Parliament passed the European Communities Act 1972, and it was given royal assent on the 17th of October. The treaty was ratified on the 1st of January 1973 and is primarily passed all legal sovereignty to a foreign state under the European Court of Justice. This effectively means Parliament was dissolved on the 31st of December 1972, as Venus was opposed to Saturn. I initially viewed all of this as a deliberate act against the people, which it is, without moral reasoning. However, this may also be viewed as the ultimate sacrifice of the Queen, essentially throwing herself onto her sword of state. This takes even more hidden significance when we consider the sword's history. Queen Elizabeth used the sword from the Honours of Scotland, which were the crown jewels of Scotland. It is one of the oldest crown jewels in Britain and was originally gifted to King James IV of Scotland by Pope Julius in 1507. Now, I'm not sure when she started using the sword as her ceremonial sword of state, but maybe this was another of her symbolism, her showing us that she was a vassal to Rome. So the Queen has seemingly ceremoniously thrown the title of the crown onto the sword of Rome and surrendered all rights as executor of our sovereignty to those acting on behalf of the Treaty of Rome, which is in direct contravention of and against the spirit, objectives, and principles of the Constitution, and therefore high treason against us, the sovereign people. The Queen would have known the consequences of signing the Act, and, as they say, the pen is mightier than the sword. We might see this as her swan song. So, since Parliament was effectively dissolved on the 31st of December 1972 and unconstitutionally claimed authority over us and under direction of the EEC, or later the EU, a priori it could be viewed that all laws, acts, and statutes prescribed by Europe, along with any alleged amendments to the constitutional law should all be struck out, especially if they are repugnant to our constitutional laws and rights as sovereigns of the realm of the kingdom. So, when we say the police are acting outside of their jurisdiction, it's because they have no jurisdiction over us, nor does Parliament or the courts, since 1972. If the Queen did this as a swan song to effectively draw our attention to it and allow the UK Parliament time to gather enough rope to hang itself, it might be assumed that they now have sufficient rope to hang every MP and Lord, past and present, every judge, and even every police officer, state official, and every single council employee complicit in this deception. The repeal of the death sentence in 1998 might also be viewed as unconstitutionally removed. So what does all this mean? Well, the Queen committed high treason and premiery against the sovereigns of the kingdom. The government committed premiery and high treason, handing our sovereign powers to a foreign state, the powers they did not hold and had no authority to give away. The kingdom cannot be passed to the Queen's successors, as it is no longer in the state it was as she received it. Therefore, Charles can never be king until the state is restored, although as sovereigns we are entitled to select an alternative monarch, especially as the succession is not currently possible. The crown, which seems to have no single legal definition, would seem to have been dissolved, or at least devoid of all powers that it held in trust for the sovereign people, which brings into question the premise that all property, such as cars, houses, land, etc., is held in trust by the Crown for our benefit, although it might also be argued that all property is theft and therefore nobody owns anything, especially the Crown. The legal system has no authority, as all powers were surrendered to a foreign state and therefore cannot be operate lawfully. And the police are answerable to us directly, as are the courts, parliament, councils, civil servants, and any other public office. This is therefore anarchy, the governance of the people by the people, obeying the constitutional and God's law. We've technically been doing it for 50 years, therefore I see no reason to rush in and alter anything and get another load of WEF puppets to run the show. As I said previously, there is no need to take to the streets in protest, no need to cause violent disorder. Let the revolution be a revolution of the mind. Change your mindset and imagine a world where we are free to say what we want without fear of unjust retribution. Let's manifest an anarchic utopia with no council tax and no income tax. Let's stop committing the crime of funding terrorists. You know, those people that terrorise us from Parliament, those that it turns out had no power over us for the past 50 years. Let's claim our reparations for their abuse of the past 50 years. Let's stop all their shenanigans and unlawful mandates. Let's reclaim our sovereignty. I suggest you start the revolution by sharing this information to the sovereign population of the world. Rest assured, if this has happened here in Great Britain, it has happened everywhere around the world, as they have all been in lockstep for many years. So what evidence is there that Prince Charles never became King of the United Kingdom? All successions of the throne are announced in the London Gazette, and as they have to tell us everything, they do not announce him as King of this realm. And this also then confirms that Parliament have sold us out. Liege Lord Charles, not King Charles. They do call him King of the Commonwealth, but not of Great Britain or the United Kingdom. So we need to understand what is meant by liege lord, and they try to trick us into thinking that he is superior sovereign, but that would be unconstitutional, as he should be empowered by us, not over us. So liege, taken on its own, means vessel, and this is a repeat of the 1366, when King John made England a vessel of Rome. So the London Gazette confirms everything I've just shown you. This is my interpretation of the facts presented to me, and I defy anyone listening or watching this presentation to prove me wrong about these facts and their lawful implications. And again, I thank Terry, the Robin Hood of the realm of England.com, and Colin Gibbons for his input and interpretations of the actions presented to us, along with David Clues of the United News Network. Oh, and Callie Spell for her Dark Matters channel that actually brought Terry to our attention. Please like and share if you found this content enlightening and informative. Terry's website, therealmofengland.com, where you can support him directly. Also, please share with anyone that works for a public office, such as a council or municipality, but especially if that office exercises authority over the public, because they need to understand that they are basically assisting or committing high treason against the sovereign population of the realm, no matter which country they are in. This is not just relevant to England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland and the Commonwealth nations. This is happening everywhere. And if you would like to support this channel, my book is available on eBay, links in the description, and with postage anywhere within the realm of England, Wales and Scotland, it is £9.99. Or you get 2 copies, one to share, for £11.11. So be an angel and give their heads a wobble. And there you go. I make these videos to change the way you think, because almost everything you have been taught was designed to stop you thinking critically and accept everything you are told as truth without question.